Welcome, everybody. I'm Chad Shank. A lot of familiar faces today, so thanks to those of you who are coming back and joining, but hello to the new folks as well. I'm based in Minnesota, in a suburb of Minneapolis, and we've got people here from the UK, we've got people here from Canada, India, all over the United States, so it's super cool that we can connect through technology, and today we're talking about Taylor Swift. So I am going to jump in and share my screen. So the songwriting of Taylor Swift. So what we're going to cover today is we're going to go over structural patterns in Taylor songs, lyrical patterns, harmonic tendencies in the songs, also discuss some of the key signatures, rhyme schemes. We're going to also review things that Taylor has shared about her own process. So really learning from her directly on kind of how she approaches the craft of songwriting. Of course, we're going to listen to songs, and then the whole idea of this is to find parts of her writing that you can use as a template from your or for your own songwriting. So why Taylor Swift? So Taylor, like I had mentioned, she has admitted a lot that she's a student of the craft of songwriting, and I think she really considers herself a songwriter, and she writes obviously very catchy songs that connect with a very wide audience, both on the pop side and the country side as well. She's one of the biggest songwriters currently, and the thing about that is there's a good chance that this is the music that your listeners or people who you want to hear your music, who they're listening to. So that kind of sets the bar for what people expect in songwriting. And what I also think is cool about Taylor is she writes about her real life experiences and things that happen in her life. And I think that's something that, obviously we can make up stories and we can write about things that are fictional. But I think what Taylor does is she does a good job of taking a personal story and making it universal. So she might be singing about an event, but she's not giving you every exact detail, but she's telling you the truth. And I think what songwriters lose sight of sometimes is we're so concerned about getting it factually right that we get it emotionally wrong. So we want to make sure that we are focusing on what is the emotion that we're trying to connect, even if we have to change the names and all of that to protect the innocent, if that makes sense. So I had posted on the meetup.com message or the comments kind of asking if there were songs that some of you liked of Taylor Swift, and Dory actually replied and said she likes the song Exile. So I thought what we do today is start with Exile and talk about, well, first we'll listen, but then we'll talk about what's happening in this song, because there's a ton of stuff just in this one song that you can use in your own songwriting. So we'll give it a listen and then we'll jump in. So as you guys were listening to that, what did you feel like the overall kind of emotion of that song was? Like what emotion did you feel as you're listening to that song? Susan says she felt loss. Absolutely. Holly says misunderstanding. Michelle, melancholy. Lauren says regret. I think, yeah, and Ron says regret too. Blame, hurt, post breakup heartache. I think that's all correct. And I think some other ones, Camden says sad, regretful, jealousy. Jealousy, yep, for sure. Falling out, regret and disappointment. Dory said she heard some anger. Absolutely. There was the one part where it talks about you didn't give me any warning signs, and then it's like I gave you tons of warning signs. Like that, the one part towards the end was almost like they were having sort of an argument together, which I thought was a cool way to sort of do a duet. I think as a songwriter, your goal is to have your listener experience the emotion that you want them to experience. I hear a lot of songwriters say, well, I just write it and then the listener can feel whatever they feel and connect the dots. But I think true like master songwriters are able to do the they're the master songwriters are able to decide what they want the listener to hear, and then the listener does fill in the blanks with their own experience, but it still is what you're looking to communicate. Um, so one of the things that we'll look at now is kind of the structure of this song, and I'm going to go back here. So, looking at this from a lyrical standpoint, there's a couple things that are happening that you don't necessarily think about as you're listening, but it's very powerful and it's something that you can do within your own writing as well. And that is, there are really two types of lyric. There's contextual lyric, or lyrics that set context or imagery. So it's kind of like context or concrete details. And then there's also emotional or internal language that communicates emotion. So what that means is, in this song, the first verse is really broken into 2 3 line segments. So if you just read the first line, I can see you standing, honey. If we hadn't heard the song before, that carries no emotional weight at all. That's just a declarative setting some context. And then with his arms around your body, that's also pretty contextual, because we don't know what the emotion is yet. So the next line then says, laughing, but the joke's not funny at all. There is where we start to get the emotional or internal language. So what this song is doing 2 lines of context and a line of emotion. And it does it again in the second section where it says it took you 5 whole minutes. That doesn't have any emotion in it. To pack us up and leave me with it. Also, that's contextual, but then it says holding all this love out here in the hall. So one of the things that you can do in your writing is to remember to set the context before you set the emotion. Because if your listener doesn't get the context first, they don't know why they're feeling what they should be feeling. So let's flip it around and let's pretend we just got the last 2 lines. So let's say Taylor said, laughing, but the joke's not funny at all. That kind of is like, okay, so what? Right? Like we don't know what the joke is. And then if she just went to the emotion, holding all this love out here in the hall, we still don't know what any of that means. And I think I hear in a lot of newer songwriters that we go straight for that emotion and we just spit that out right away. And it doesn't give us anything to hang that emotion on. So think of the context of the external, which is something that you can experience through your senses, something you can see, hear, taste, smell, touch, something that's moving, and then put emotion onto it after that. So there's a pattern there. So it goes contextual, contextual, emotional, contextual, contextual, emotional. And I think that's purposeful, especially with writers at the level that wrote this song. And then the next thing to look at in the lyrics is the rhyme scheme. So the rhyme scheme is an AAB CCB rhyme scheme. So it's honey, body, all, minutes with it, hall. So it's that AAB CCB, which is a very effective rhyme scheme that Taylor actually uses in quite a few of her songs, and something that you can use in your writing as well. From a melodic standpoint, in the verse, the line 1 establishes the motif that we heard in the intro. So it's the whoops. That's the first motif, and then it goes. So it's the first motif, the line 2 repeats it, and then there's kind of a new motif in line 3, which is actually kind of an extension of the first motif, because laughing but the joke's not funny at all, is the same as I can see you stand, laughing but the jokes. So it's the same motif that follows through that verse. Any questions on that stuff? I think this is the stuff that gets super cool when you start looking at it at this level, because there's a lot of things that are going on that you don't think about as you're listening to it. Perfect. So the other thing to think of, oh, did someone say something? Oh, okay. So the other thing to think about too is where they are starting the melody from a melodic standpoint. So the chords of this song are it's a G flat major to an E flat minor. And a lot of songwriters will start on the root of a chord. So they would do that as the first note. So that changes how the emotion gets carried. So let's say, if we wrote this like how a lot of songwriters would have written it, so it would be, I can see you standing, honey, with his arms around your body, laughing, but the joke's not funny at all. So I changed the melody a little bit, but do you hear how that has a different sound to it? So that's the first degree of the scale. If we go up one, which would be the two, it would go, I can see you standing, honey, with his arms around your body. That doesn't feel, that feels, it's the wrong emotion, right? But when you get to that third, which is also a chord note, but it's more unstable. It's stable but a little bit unstable, right? And that's the emotion that I think they're saying in these lyrics, where there's a stability, but there's also like sort of like that anger or that instability. So I can see you standing, honey, with your arms around, or with his arms around your body, laughing, but the joke's not funny at all. So it sounds, and obviously that's how they wrote it, so that sounds right to us, but I think it sounds, that just creates such a nice, like stable but unstable feeling that I think carries throughout out the song. The other thing that's happening is the chords are changing every measure. So every 4 beats, the chords are changing within this section. Any questions on that or comments? So once we get through that section, then we get to what would be the chorus. So this chorus follows a really great thing that you should be doing in your songs as well, is it's changing the rhyme scheme from the verse. So one of the things that you want to usually do is create contrast between your sections. And this song does it in a few different ways. So first off, the rhyme scheme is different. If you remember, the rhyme scheme in the verse was AAB, CCB. So it's like a couplet, a line, a couplet, and then the third and the sixth lines rhyme. So what this rhyme scheme does is it becomes an ABA, B with a little bit of a C, and then a CCA. So the rhyme scheme is different, but also if you notice, there's one more line in this section as well. So not only changing the rhyme scheme, but they're changing the number of lines. So changing number of lines between sections is a powerful tool as well. And another thing that this section does is it starts off with a more internal thought. So it starts off with, I think I've seen this film before, and I didn't like the ending. So we're starting with emotions in this one. So instead of starting with context, we're starting with the emotional center, which is usually what your chorus does, is usually the chorus is what the song is about from that emotional standpoint. So your chorus really tells you why this matters. So in this example, they're saying, I think I've seen this film before, which basically means, this is all happening over again. You did this to me. There's a metaphor here where it says, you're not my homeland anymore. So what am I defending now? You were my town. There's another metaphor. Now I'm in exile, seeing you out. I think I've seen this film before. So it's such a cool thing, not only to throw in that metaphor, because the metaphor tells you a lot, but it also um it gives you that emotion before the context in the chorus. And then from a motif standpoint, you have the line one where I think I've seen this film before. That da 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 da. And then the motif number two is, and I didn't like the ending. And then it repeats da 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 da. So it adds another note. So it's just a variation of what you heard in motif two. And one thing that I didn't point out in the verses is many times your melodic motif pattern matches your rhyme scheme. So lines that rhyme have the same melody and same melodic motif. So you have it's almost like an A B A B with a variation, which is the C, and then you have a new motif, and then it comes back to the one, which is exactly what the rhyme is doing as well. So I think that's something that you can think about in your own songwriting too, is you don't have to be complicated in your melodies. I think sometimes we overthink melodies and we try to do too much. And if you look at this, there's really only three pieces that are happening, where it's the I think I've seen this da 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 na da 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 down down da 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 da. So it's very simple, but it works quite well. From a chord standpoint, this chorus changes the chord progression. So that's another tool that you can use in your songs, is changing the chord progression between your verse and your chorus to change the harmonic rhythm. And what this chorus does is, instead of changing chords every measure, it changes chords every 2 beats. So you have 2 chords per measure. So it goes dun 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 da 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 dun 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 dun. And then it goes back to the verse. So that creates that contrast again, where the verse and the chorus sound different. So I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you guys pretty fast. Are there any questions or thoughts on some of this? And feel free to put it in the chat or raise your hand as well. Oops, I missed some chats. I'm sorry. Irish says context is the orientation to the situation. Absolutely. Stu says, how important was it to trail them to trail the motif in the intro, would it not work without? Stu, I think what you're saying is the intro of the song. What it does is it's foreshadowing that verse melody, and that's something that you can do in your songs as well, is in your instrument intro, you can give a little hint of another melodic motif that comes later in the song, because what that does is it it makes it feel comfortable to the listener because they've heard it before. So subconsciously it feels connected. Um, Camden says he has trouble making the most of the rhyme schemes sound natural. He uses AABB or AABA. Yeah, rhyme, definitely, if you want it to sound natural, is to sometimes it's not to use perfect rhyme, right? Like, don't necessarily use exactly perfect sounding rhyme, but also just pay attention to how you're singing the words. Like, sometimes we try to, so there's masculine and there's feminine rhymes, and masculine rhymes are when there is a strong stress in the syllable that is rhyming. So that would be like tough and cup. That's a masculine rhyme because it's a strong, it's one syllable, both of them are strong. Like a feminine rhyme would be like free and body, because body is a strong syllable followed by a unstressed syllable. So body. And a lot of times we will try to rhyme a masculine word with a feminine word, and that becomes free and body, right? So sometimes when we're singing, we're putting that stress on the wrong syllable, so it sounds forced and unnatural. And what that does is it makes it not sound believable to your listener. So paying attention to how you're stressing your syllables and making sure it's sung the way it's spoken is ultra important, because people don't talk necessarily. And I mean, in some, I suppose, depending on if English wasn't your first language, you may pronounce words differently. But generally, like body is a strong, weak body, strong, weak. So when you sing it, you wouldn't have the D sound on a strong beat, because we don't sing it body, if that makes sense. Um, Lauren says, can you tell us the actual chords in the chorus versus the verse? Yeah. So the verse just alternates between G flat major to E flat minor, and it just rocks back and forth on that. And then when you get to the chorus, it goes B major to D flat major to E flat minor, back to D flat major, and then back to B. So it's basically starting, it's the song is in the key of G flat. So it's basically starting on the 4, going up to the 5, to the 6, to the 5, to the 4 is what it's doing in that. Han says, if you take a melody first approach, don't you have a predetermined rhyme scheme regardless of the emotion of the words they convey? Yes. So that's another thing to think about, is lines that have the same melody many, many times are going to be songs that rhyme lyrically as well. So I look at it as melodic rhyme, right? Lines that sound the same are rhyming in melody, right? That's what a rhyme is something that sonically matches. So yes, so a lot of times if you do write melody first, you kind of instinctually will rhyme that way, but again, you don't have to. It really just depends on what the song calls for. Susan says, one of the most hated pet peeves, that how people sing the wrong syllables. Yep. Where the stress is on the wrong syllable. Yeah, the emphasis is on the wrong syllable. Um, so yeah, so phrasing your lyric is super important because it makes your listener instantly think they're listening to a song. Like when we listened to this Taylor Swift Exile song, you weren't thinking the whole time that this is a written piece, right? You experienced it as a work. And I think that's a goal of us as songwriters is we don't want the listener to be thinking, "Oh, here's what they did, they rhymed here." Like we didn't listen to it thinking like, "Oh, here's the rhyme and here comes the rhyme." So it takes work. It takes a lot of practice to get to the point of a professional songwriter for sure. So next up on this, oops. Susan says if rhymes are forced, that's also very distracting. Absolutely. It's better to not rhyme than to force a rhyme because it just ruins it. So again, just to cover some of the tools that you can use just from this one song, you can contrast your rhyme scheme section to section, use only 2 or 3 melodic motifs per section. Lines that rhyme have the same melodic motif. You can also use the rule of 2. So if you do something twice, don't do it again until you do something different. So that's like melodically in the verses, it did the first line of, or the first set of 3 lines, that was 1 set. It did the next 3 lines, that's 2 sets. And then by the time we get to the chorus, it does something totally different melodically and in all the other ways as well. So that's using that rule of 2. You can also vary the number of lines between your sections. That adds contrast. Start your verses with context details and then sum it up with the emotion and explain why the emotion matters. And then also put a vocal melody into the intro music as a foreshadow. We talked about that as well. Tom in the chat says masculine and feminine rhymes. Yes, Pat Pattison has a great book on that. So that's where I learned a lot of this type of stuff. Is I've taken a few of Pat's classes through Berkeley, and read the books that he's put out, and definitely that's a great resource for sure. And next month in the Minnesota Association of Songwriters that I'm part of, May 12th, Pat Pattison is actually going to join me on one of these workshops for that. And you'd need to be a member of Minnesota Association of Songwriters, but it's just $50 per year. And I think, oh, Michelle, I just saw she's from Minnesota and go to Berkeley too. Sweet. Awesome. So join us May 12th for Pat Pattison as well. Awesome. Well, it's good to see you, Michelle. So next up, let's hear from Taylor herself. Stu, the Pat Pattison workshop with me, yes, it will be online. It's 7:00 Central on May 12th. So let's hear from Taylor herself for a little while and see what she has to say about some songwriting. So I thought that was pretty cool to hear some of that directly from her. The next thing that I have on here is we've kind of talked about this already. Taylor writes a lot in the key of C. I know the last song that we talked about was in G flat, but I think they lowered it because of the male that was singing with her. But a lot of her songs are in the key of C or somewhere nearby C. You'll see them in a few different keys, but it's usually within a few notes of the key of C. So I think it's more to do with her vocal. She uses melody simply but brilliantly, and she also contrasts the sections really well, lyrically, melodically, and a lot of different. Also, she writes with a lot of people that are known to start with melody and rhythmic motifs, which she works a lot with Max Martin. She works with Jack Antonoff. Like a lot of those people are very melodic focused. So a lot of times they're starting with kind of the feel of the song and sort of what's happening melodically. And Andrea Stolpe, who is also a Berkeley professor, she says that your lyric will never outweigh the emotion that your music contains. So the music contains the emotion, and your lyric basically can fill in that emotion and help us experience it, but you'll never outright that emotion. So I think that's why a lot of hit songwriters start with kind of that vibe or what the music is saying, because you'll never be able to outright it, because we experience music and hear it more emotionally than we do lyric, which is interesting to think about. Taylor also knows her audience. Her chords are also usually triads. Like, she doesn't do a lot of seven chords. She doesn't do a lot of minor sevens. It's usually just straight triads. She writes universally. She writes autobiographically. She supports her songs through the craft, and she really is just herself. And I think she writes all of the time. So looking at another song of hers is You Belong With Me, which is an earlier song. It made it to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts in 2009. And we will give this one a taste, and then we'll come back and break it down as well. So this song was written by Taylor Swift and Liz Rose. So Camden in the chat said what sticks to him is about the pre-chorus. So the pre-chorus is definitely hooky in that song. Susan said she does the syllable with baby. She does. What works, I think, in this situation is that the uh the melody is so strong that it outweighs the weird phrasing, and I think it also has a like, this almost has sort of a cartoony type feel to it, and it's more fun and bouncy, and I think that makes a difference in how you're phrasing as well. Because I don't think that in this case, I don't think it takes away from the rest of the meaning, because I think that's more of a hook melodically, and and Susan says the singer can overcome it also with the way they sing the first syllable. Absolutely. And I think we've already gotten the story by the time that we're at that point. So we believe it already. So it doesn't take us out of the song too much, because we're rhythmically invested. Oops, there we go. So what's interesting about this song is, yeah, definitely it is an exception. And there's an exception to everything, because there's really no rules, but it's really just what works. There's a lot of sections in this song. And what's interesting about it is there's a 4-bar intro. One of the things that this song does is it starts with an 8-bar verse, and it's talking about you, and then the second verse talks about me, and then there's a pre-chorus, a chorus, there's like a turnaround, kind of a post-chorus thing, and then the second, or what we would call probably the third verse in the song, it talks about us. And that's an interesting way that you can advance the who, the when, and the where of your song story. A lot of times your first verse will establish a who, a when, and a where. So you kind of know who it's happening to, when it's happening, or where it's happening. And sometimes those things are implied, because sometimes you don't know exactly when it's happening or exactly where, but you definitely know who. And this song goes you, me, us. And that's a cool way to write kind of these love songs in your own songs as well. The other things, there's kind of a second chorus the next time it comes around, where it uses the same melody but adds different words. So it kind of expands on that chorus idea. Then there's a guitar solo, there's a bridge, and then there's a drop chorus, and then it does the chorus out. So it's got a lot of sections, and it's a longer song than some songs, but you don't necessarily get bored with it, which is great. So other things that I noticed, its tempo is 130 beats per minute, which is pretty fast. Key signature, it's an F major, or F sharp major, which again, that's basically the same key as Exile is in, which is interesting. And the verse chords change every 2 bars. So the harmonic rhythm is like you have each chord last 2 bars. The harmonic rhythm changes to every bar in the pre-chorus, and it also changes the chord progression. But then the chorus comes back to the same progression as the verse, and it goes back to having 2 bars per chord. So it alternates and adds that contrast between the sections. Hans in the chat says, what's a drop chorus? So a drop chorus is where some of the instrumentation kind of drops out, but the chorus is still sung. So it kind of drops the, a lot of times after a bridge, you'll hear maybe the drums drop out, or maybe you just have drums. Like the arrangement kind of drops out and it's just the vocal. The bridge is the same as the pre-chorus. So the chords and everything are the same. By changing the order of the chords in each section, and also by changing how often the chords change. So if you notice in the verse, you have F sharp, C sharp, G sharp minor, and B. You have all of those chords just in a different order as the verse. So that's a trick that you can do between sections as well. So if you notice, instead of starting here, the pre-chorus is actually like it's starting here and then follows that progression. So that's an easy way to add some contrast as well. From a rhyme scheme perspective, the rhyme scheme in the verse is the same as what she did in Exile. It's AAB, CCB. Pre-chorus changes to couplets. It's AABB. And then your chorus has kind of an AABBB. So it kind of continues that couplet feel. And it creates kind of that sense of unity, but each section is using a different length of notes that creates contrast as well. And there's also a different number of lines. Like we talked about before, one of the ways to add contrast between sections is change the number of lines. And this song actually does that. So in the verse, there's 6 lines, pre-chorus, there's 4, and then it goes to 5 in the chorus. And what's interesting about the chorus is it puts the title or the hook, "You Belong With Me," in the 5th line, which makes it stand out. And what we would call that is like a power position. So it actually shines a light on that phrase, "You belong with me." And the "me" ends on the downbeat. So she's accenting the word "me." And we'll talk about that in a moment. So other things to look at in this song, verses start on the downbeat, and it gives the song a very direct, almost like stern feel, and it creates the prosody or the match between the lyrics and the music of what she's singing. So she's kind of calling someone out, and if you're starting on the downbeat, that's more of a stern kind of a thought process. The pre-chorus then starts on a pickup line before the downbeat, so there's your contrast added. And also in the pre-chorus, certain words are emphasized on downbeats where it goes, she's, like she, dun, 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 I'm, she, I'm. So it creates this sense of comparison because you're highlighting those words. And what I think is really cool is the words dreamin' and waking are on downbeats as well. So it's like she's comparing, like she, me, she, me, and then she's also like dreaming, waking. So she's saying one of us is like you're dreaming, one of us is like you're actually awake, which I think is really cool. Also, the chorus starts before the downbeat, but it has more notes than the pre-chorus, so it creates a sense of contrast, and it also creates motion because it's not as on the beat. And we already talked about "me" is on the downbeat, showing that the importance of that word. So what if other words were put on the downbeat? So what if we said, "You belong with me"? That feels like nobody else but you belong with me, right? That changes the meaning. If we say "you belong with me," that means like you don't belong anywhere else. You belong with me. Or if you say "you belong with me," that would be you don't belong without me, you belong with me, which is different than "you belong with me." That makes it be like you belong with me instead of that other person. So one thing to try in your writing is to look at how you're setting your hook on the downbeat, because accenting a different word can completely change what you're trying to say, which I think is something that was like mind blowing when I started like thinking about this, because it literally does change the meaning of phrases. So phrasing is so important when you think about this. So again, just covered a ton of stuff there. Any questions on that song or anything we just went over? Perfect. Well, let's keep rolling on. So the next song that we're going to listen to, or actually, I wanted to introduce you to the co-writer that wrote that song with Taylor, to give you a kind of a sense of her and some of the experience of her working with Taylor. I thought that was really cool because she seems really down to earth, and I liked how she said she doesn't know necessarily when she's written a hit. She just knows when she's written a song that she really likes, and I think that's the goal for all of us, I think. Hans asks, can you play around with phrasing chords like vocal lines, as in, can you alter how chords fall in relation to the downbeat for two verses? For sure. Yeah, you could have your chords changing on different beats. That can definitely change the feel of the song. And the way that you decide that is you don't just do it for doing its sake. What you want to do is make sure that it fits with the emotion that you're trying to communicate. So if you have, let's say, a more frantic or unstable emotion, you would then change the chords in a more unstable way. So maybe you change them on off beats, or you maybe don't have a symmetrical chord progression. So maybe it's not one chord every measure. Maybe it's one measure has one chord, the next one has two, the next one might have three chords. Like, make it sort of unbalanced, if that makes sense. But that comes back to, does it communicate the emotion that you're trying to communicate? So Eve says, is she using more often verses and chorus in the same key in the majority of her songs? Yes, most of these songs are not changing keys. They're staying within the same they're staying within the same key. So the next song we're going to listen to is Delicate, which is off of Taylor's album Reputation. So it's a little bit newer song. Um, and this one has a different feel than the the last song that we listened to. So let's take a listen to this. So Stu says, what makes this sound more modern? Oh, what makes it sound more modern than the previous ones? Um, I think there's a couple things that make it sound more modern. I think that it's the phrasing, the way that the melody is very rhythmic. I think that's a trend that's happening now in more current music. Um, and what I thought's cool about this song is delicate, like the dot 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 is a motif that's everywhere. Like, is it cool that I said all that? Delicate. Uh, isn't it? Isn't it? Delicate, delicate. Like, everything kind of revolves around that triplet feel, which I think is really cool use of that motif throughout the whole song. And that's something that even classical composers would use in their writing, where you take a motif and you develop a whole movement by changing and varying that motif. And that's kind of what they did with this song. But yeah, what makes it sound more modern too is the production. I mean, I think, it's got that vocoder sound on her voice. You also have more electronic drum sounds. There's synthesizers. So the production makes a difference as well. Um, Looking at other pieces of the song, to me, it sounds like the pre-chorus is what it actually starts the song with. So the pre-chorus is kind of the intro. Then it goes to a verse. There's a chorus, followed by another chorus, and then there's a post-chorus, and then there's another 8-bar verse, followed by a pre-chorus, chorus, post-chorus, bridge, and then it does the pre-chorus out. And what a post-chorus is kind of like a secondary hook. And I'll show you kind of on when we look at the melody what section that looks like. But Here we have some changing or not chord progressions, rhyme schemes for this song. So the pre-chorus goes XXA, XXA. If you notice, Taylor writes a lot of her sections with 6 lines, which is cool. So it goes XXA, XXA, and then when it gets to the verse, it's actually AAA, BBB. So again, the rhyme scheme changes between sections. Once it gets to the chorus, every line rhymes. So again, that's different than what's happened in each of these sections before. And then your verse 2 does the same thing as your verse 1. So again, contrast is that really really important thing to think about as you're writing. Delicate was written by Taylor Swift, Max Martin, and Shellback. It went to number 12 on the Hot 100, and it was number 1 radio airplay. So Max Martin and Shellback are known to write melody and chords first. That's kind of the Swedish way of doing it. They're in Sweden. Actually, well, they're from Sweden. They're in LA now. But the song is in the key of C major. It's 94 beats per minute. The chord progression stays the same for the entire song. It just goes from C to D minor, A minor to F. It's 1 chord per bar. The C chord establishes that root, and then the minor chords add the unsettled feel, and then the F brings us back to some stability before it resolves back to the C. So that is a plagal cadence because it goes from the F to the C. So the chord progression is so it's the 1, 2, 6, 4 progression. The melody in the verse is centered around the D. So it's the dive bar on the east side, where you at? Dun 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 dun. It's hard. My microphone cord's in the way, but you get the idea. So it's starting on the second. It's starting on a note that's not in the chord, which creates that instability as well. And this song kind of has like a longing and kind of a like a wanting to it, and I think that melody creates that. And then the chorus melody starts on the root note, so that gives us the release that we built up with all that tension. So there's a lot of tension there, but then when it comes to that chorus, that is completely resolved. It's the one chord, the one note, and that contrast from the other section. So it feels satisfying when we get to the chorus. Excuse me. The verse melody starts on the downbeat. The chorus melody starts before the downbeat with a pickup, and then the bridge starts after the downbeat. And that's another great way to contrast sections as well. And what I wanted to show you here, can you guys still see my screen? Perfect. So there is a site called Hook Theory, which they don't have every song, but they have a lot of songs on it. And they basically show you the melody and the chords of various popular songs. And then they also have an app called HookPad where you can actually sort of experiment with your own melodies and chords, which I think it's like $5 a month or something like that. But you can use parts of the site for free. So this shows you the melody within these different sections of the song. So this is the intro melody. And if you look just visually, you can see that this section matches this section. So there's 2 really 3-bar motifs or 1 3-bar motif that repeats in this intro. that was that intro. Then when we get to the verse, and the other thing to look at is how the contrast is happening. This melody it has a lot of leaps. It kind of covers a lot of notes. But then when you get to the verse, there's not a lot of leaping going on here, but the rhythm changes. And then when you get to the chorus, then this would be like the last measure up here before the chorus melody starts. But so on this section here, you can actually see visually that motif of those three notes, the da 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 da. So it's interesting to see that. And one of the reasons why the melody contrasts between sections so much is because the chords aren't changing. If your chord progression stays the same, you want to add contrast in other ways. And ways to do that would be the notes and then the rhythm of your melody. And then lastly, on the bridge, the chord progression does change. So now we not only have rhythmic contrast, we have lyrical contrast, plus we have harmonic contrast with the chords changing. And that sounds like this. So it's really interesting to break it down and hear it at the foundation of what's happening within those. So any questions on what we covered in Delicate, or any thoughts on kind of what you're seeing as we go over these things? I think that's pretty cool to see how they did it. And I see that Kay in the chat said that's a Shure SM7B mic. Definitely, that's a really workhorse mic. That's really great and not super expensive. Ron says he loves seeing the production techniques. I eat this stuff up too. Like, I just love seeing how other songwriters work. And what I like about it is it's not that different than what I sort of do on my own, or like when I'm co-writing. It's like we're all kind of doing the same thing. We all still have to start with a blank slate. So the next piece is about her song Lover, which is from her album Lover. And this is a really cool diary of a song where they talk about writing, and she gives a more of a glance into kind of what she thinks about songwriting as well. All right, so that's going to wrap up kind of that part of the presentation. So any questions or comments on what we covered today? I see Hans in the chat says he has a phrasing question. So he said in 4/4 time, the sequence of beat emphasis goes on the 1, 2, 3, 4. So how does it fare in 6/8? So your strongest beat in any key signature is always the 1. So your downbeat is always the strongest. And then you can kind of sense which beats are the next strongest. So like in 6/8 time, it's like the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So your second strongest beat then is the 4 within that counting. But that's a great question. Lauren says she likes that her process is no different than ours. We're all songwriters for sure. And I think that's the thing to remember, that writing good songs is really hard. So like when you're sitting there and you're getting frustrated with, what you're coming up with and it's not sounding right and all of these things, that's where you go to the craft of it, where you start to see like, oh, why does my chorus sound exactly like my verse? Like, what can I change? Is it melodic? Is it lyrical? Is it harmonic? Like, what is that? Um, so that's where you kind of go into using your know-how more so than the inspiration, because I think songwriting is 50% inspiration and 50% know-how, because you're kind of using your the technicality side to deliver your idea. So that's going to wrap up everything for me. Anybody else have any other questions, comments, or anything that they want to share um, today, or anything that we can cover? Perfect. Well, if there's nothing else, Stu says it makes him think that he gets carried away with complexity in the music side. Absolutely. That's something that can happen sometimes, where you start to overthink or overcomplicate the music, when the music a lot of times is there to support the idea, right? And that's what you need to keep in mind, is make those decisions based on what you want to do. So um Jay has his hand raised. Jay?
Hey, Chad. Again, thank you so much for all of these that you do. Incredible work, great guidance here in the milieu. I think this is like my third Taylor Swift workshop with you. And because she's such a great case study, I learn so much every time because I have a better comprehension of the whole. So I get to move from segment to segment. And without you providing this implement for me, I wouldn't have this opportunity. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for showing up so much. Maybe someday we'll get to meet.
I look forward to that. Take
Awesome.
care,
Thanks,
buddy.
Jay. Michelle says in the chat, she says she's thought about taking a songwriting camp from Andrea Stolpe. Would I recommend that? Is she a good teacher? Yes. So I was introduced to Andrea probably like 10 or 11 years ago, when I took, well, first I got her book, and then I took some of her classes at Berkeley. So I kind of got to know her virtually. And over the years, we've kind of kept in touch, and I've actually led some workshops with her for the Minnesota Association of Songwriters. So we've kind of gotten to know each other, and I'm actually going to Nashville this summer to her songwriting retreat that she does. But if you want to get a taste of what she does just in general, there's a couple ways that you can do that. You there She does an online retreat, which is like 3 days, like a Friday, Saturday, and a Sunday. And if you do the entry point, I think it's like $150, but that gives you access then to her alumni. She does a monthly sort of like Q&A session, sort of like this. So you can have that. So it gives you a taste of what she does. And I would watch a lot of her videos on YouTube as well, because I mean, the way she connects really inspires me, and I would say that she's one of my mentors. So I'm excited to actually meet her in person this summer for sure.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was the one I was thinking of taking, was the Nashville one, but I didn't know if it was the same as what they teach at Berkeley, so that's very helpful. Thank you.
So kind of. I mean, I think she expands it a little bit more. Like, she kind of takes everything that she has learned and everything that she's done and sort of turns it into her own thing. A lot of what she talks about, they do teach at Berkeley, just like a lot of what I talk about, they teach through Berkeley, because that's kind of where I learned and stuff. But um, it's definitely worth it. And she's just like, every time I do something with Andrea, I just feel like inspired to write, and like that's just always worth it for me. So yeah, I wish I had more money so I could do more, but yeah, it's really good. So Michelle, what are you taking through Berkeley right now?
So I actually graduated in October. My degree was
Cool.
in vocal performance, production, and songwriting, but I'm starting my songwriting master's degree in the fall with Berkeley Online.
Awesome. Very cool. Yeah. I did the professional certificate like 10 years ago. So I think I've taken like 7 Berkeley courses. Like, they're really good. The online courses are awesome. They're not
Yeah, that's what
cheap.
I Yeah, that's what I graduated with. I switched to Berkeley Online after being in Boston for 2 years.
Cool. Awesome. Hans says, "Do I have any books or course recommendations that use melody first approach?" Um Yes. So there are a couple of books that Jimmy Kachulis has written. There's one called it's like Melody Workshop. That's very helpful to learn melody. Um, and then he also has a book on harmony as well. So a harmony and melody workshop books, and those are actually the text that Berklee Online uses to teach. So you can kind of teach yourself some of the stuff. Also, from a melody first standpoint, classes, it used to be called monthly.com, but now they call it Studio. And there's a Ryan Tedder online course. And Ryan Tedder writes melody first and then writes lyrics. I've taken that course. It's like a month long, and you write I think 3 songs with Ryan sort of guiding you, and then you're in a class setting, so you upload your work and then you sort of critique each other. It's really a cool experience. Like, it's a couple $100, so it's not cheap, but it's not overly expensive. I would recommend that because it gives you literally step by step how a hit songwriter writes. And then also that Lewis L., who's another hit songwriter, he starts with melody first as well. And I'm signed up starting in May. There's a new songwriting course with her, the artist Her. She's actually teaching a class on there about how she writes songs. So definitely I would suggest those for sure. And then just YouTube videos. I think that's free college basically is YouTube at this point.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Let's see what Camden says. Any talk on my lyrics first approach, or is that just what I like to play? Lyrics first is definitely, I mean, lyric versus melody first, it doesn't matter as long as it works for you. So whatever process works best. Again, the idea is delivering on an emotion. So however you find a way to do that, it's the right way, right? Everybody has their own kind of ways of doing it. And then Lauren says The Craft of Lyric Writing from Sheila Davis. That's a great book. Yep. Also, any of the Pat Pattison books, any of the books that Andrea Stolpe has done. There's a book by Jack Perricone through Berklee called Great Songwriting Techniques. That one covers melody, lyrics, and kind of the whole gamut. I love that book. Yeah, there's just a ton of stuff that anything that Berklee Press puts out, I would say is great to look into. Also, a site that I've gotten more involved with lately is Songtown. I don't know if you guys have ever gone to Songtown, but they have a lot of great online courses as well. You can sign up for them. I know, Adam, you're part of Songtown. They have a lot of stuff where, like, depending on if you're just doing songwriting for fun, you can do that. They also have stuff if you're looking to do like commercial writing and things. So there's a lot of opportunities that they have there. So I've been part of what I've been doing this last month is I got accepted into one of their edge groups, they call them, where then you have a monthly meeting with a publisher and you get feedback on your writing, and they sort of give you monthly writing assignments. And I got accepted into one of those. So that's been exciting to kind of have that feedback on the songs that I've been writing. So that's been great. Perfect. Well, if not, everybody have a great rest of the day and a great rest of the weekend. I appreciate you guys, spending some time with me again here on a Saturday. So hopefully we'll see you in about a few weeks on May 7th.